Welcome to the Real Life Man podcast, where we discuss masculinity, faith, and the struggles we don't always talk about. All right, well, welcome back to the RLM podcast. Thank you for coming on here, John. We have a new guest that I wanted to present to everybody and kind of get your God story. And we also have Chris on the phone. You guys already know Chris and me pretty well. I was hoping to get a quick introduction for John Kelsey. And John, would you just kind of present yourself and tell us who you are, what you've done for the last couple of years.
Just the last couple?
A
Go
couple
ahead.
decades. Let's do decades.
Well, thanks, Mark, Chris, for inviting me on. That's an honor. Yes, my name's John Kelsey. My wife, Jen, we're high school sweethearts. We've been together since we're 16. And our son, Josiah Max, just turned 22. And let's see, we've been earning our living by telling people about Jesus for the last 30 years. And recently, we've been working with the ministry called the Navigators, and they're based out of Colorado Springs. And their focus is basically really wanting to help people grow deeply in their walk with God.
Hmm.
Simply put, but powerful.
Yeah. All right, John, this is great. And so I think we talked a couple of weeks ago on just who you were, what your story a little bit was. And I thought that your story was really perplexing and interesting and just amazing to see how the Holy Spirit has worked inside of your life to get you to where you are today. You didn't start off as a navigator. Can
Far from it.
you tell us what your family situation was as a kid, and what it was like growing up as John Kelsey?
Yeah, it's I'm so thankful for my family, mom, dad, two older sisters. Um, and I kind of struggle at what what to say and how to say um, what that was like because I love my family so much. They're so good to me, and the scriptures are very clear about honoring your family and particularly honoring your father and mother. I mean, that is a command that you know that's a decree from Jesus to us. So I kind of wrestle on how to frame certain parts of my God story because I want to be very respectful. But at the same time, some things are, they're true, and the Lord has really pressed upon me to share my God story. So I don't know about for you men, what there's some tension in that.
Oh, yeah.
So if
We've
some of
talked
this,
about that before. Yes.
yeah,
But
some of this feels a little bit, I'm kind of even in my sharing of my story, if I'm kind of self-editing, that's just something I wrestle with all the time. But my father's with Jesus. I preached his funeral 4 or 5 years ago. And so I want to be very clear up front. My father and I reconciled many years ago and um, loved my father. He loved me. He would hug me, kiss me on the cheek, had a very warm relationship with my dad years before he died. Um, it wasn't like that for a long time, though. And I think so that's probably a large part of the tension I feel in telling, the early part of my story. My father was a bivocational Baptist pastor. He worked at oil companies during the week, and then he would preach at very small Baptist churches, usually like in the rural part of northeastern Oklahoma on the weekends. He wanted to be in full-time ministry, but two things. Number one, my mom did not want to do that. And two, he just never could find an opportunity where a church or that God would open the door. So he's always frustrated by that. And there was just problems in our home behind closed doors. There was a lot of fighting and frustration and depression and anger
Mm.
and but that was behind closed doors, openly into the community. Our family was very well liked, very well thought of, um, and my family were definitely people of integrity, worked hard, good people, good neighbors. But again, like with a lot of families behind closed doors, there's another story. And so, when you're very young, I was the youngest. And I was a very peaceful, quiet, kind of an introverted, shy child. So you learn early on, you know, how to act in public. And then, um, because there's consequences too, if you act it out. And, my sisters and I, we were in church 3 times a week.
Mm.
Um, and so we were part of the large county seat church in town. And that was the church my mom grew up in, when she was young. And it was a good church, heard the gospel, understood the truth, and we were loved and had fun at that church. It was just 3 blocks from my house. But, I think it was really difficult because I would hear the gospel and the love of Jesus that morning, but no fooling by, Sunday afternoon. By the time I was probably about the age of 4, there was beatings and yelling, and I was afraid. And so early on, I was confused about, well, I'm hearing about God loves me and God is a good father. But, by 2 or 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, my father, I felt like he hated me and I was afraid. I didn't know where to go. And so, when you're a child, and a little boy who looks up to his dad, and my father was 6'3", 220. um, I, there was just kind of some cracks forming in my identity and my reality about what I was hearing, and then what I was interpreting and how I was working that self out. I
Mm.
think as men, particularly those of us who were born and raised in church and we're forming our categories of what truth are, we're trying to anchor that into something. We're hearing something that's a truth claim, and then we're trying to attach it to, okay, what is the permanence of that? I didn't have that. I was hearing this, but it didn't make sense to me in my home. And my mother did her best to intervene, try to get in between my father and I. Um, but, she could only do so much. I quickly saw that, my dad was really hurtful and cruel to my sisters, but it was very different with me. There was an elevated level of rage and just abuse towards me that even my sisters didn't see. And then, as I got a little bit older, my father would tell me I wasn't worth anything. He would say I wasn't worth a bucket of warm spit. I couldn't do anything right. So in some ways, the verbal abuse was even worse than the physical abuse.
John, can I ask a question before
Yeah.
we move forward on that? How young do you remember? Do these memories settle on you? You go that you saw discrepancy,
Mm-hmm.
and then how young would you say you were when you began to hear those kind of um, those verbal attacks on your value? How young?
The physical abuse started when I was 4. I can consciously remember the verbal probably about first grade. And again, I didn't know. He was out of work. My poor dad. He worked so hard. But when you're in oil and gas in Tulsa in the 70s, and then coming into the 80s, he would work and then he'd be laid off, and then he would get another job. He'd be laid off. And as he was getting older, it was harder for him to be rehired, or when they could, fire him, they could rehire somebody younger. It was just getting harder as he got older. So I know that was bringing a lot of pressure on him with a wife and 3 kids and a mortgage. And then I found out much later, he was the youngest of 5 brothers. His older brothers were combat veterans of World War II. They didn't know what those guys came back with, PTSD. They didn't have words for that. But he was horribly physically abused by one of his older brothers that came back from the war. And and my father started drinking when he was in the 9th grade. He was an alcoholic by the time he met my mom when they were in college. And he quit drinking to marry her. And so there was just, and he knew the Lord, and but there was just so much wrapped up in him that,
Mm.
again, they didn't understand or know how to deal with when I was a kid. And poor guy, he was just a tortured person. And all he knew to do was to act out with me that had been acted out on him. But again, I'm 4 or 5, 6 years old. You know, I couldn't be Dr. Phil. I
And
was a kid.
the reality is that like yes, you can be saved and you can understand the love of God and you can also still have a sinful nature. We all do
Yeah,
still have attached to
yeah,
us with families of origins and
yeah,
the brutality of just sin impacting our life and reproducing that. And so it's just really it's a sad thing to see, and I feel so bad for the little John, 5-year-old John, just having to go through that. That must have been brutal. And so, anyways, I just want to say, like, yes, your dad, poor dad, for having been brutally, what do you call it, abused by his own brothers. But then there's also you, and you were,
yeah,
that's who you were, and you were not protected. And so,
yeah.
that's hard,
Yes, and that was happening in homes everywhere.
totally.
And but again, I just in my world it was me, and I think we can talk about this later, but it shaped me. And God redeems those things later in life. But those wounds are very open and very real. And it wasn't until I was at the age of 8 that something happened. If I finally broke, again, this wasn't language I had at the time, but looking back, I was. Mom said I was quiet, very peaceful, very kind, very warm, and very loving. But I remember in third grade, an event happened at the house again after church. It seemed like things always happened after church. Um, there was a particular event where my father snapped and he went into a rage. He grabbed a belt. He would usually beat me with a belt, and a big belt buckle had a star on it. And anyway, I'm going to detail, but anyway, that day it was particularly just crazy. He went into a rage, and I thought he was going to kill me. I really did. And he was saying he was going to wrap the belt around my neck and strangle me. And I don't know. I was terrified. I really thought he was going to do it. And so I was screaming. I ran into our bathroom, locked the doors, and he was trying to break the door down. Was banging on it. I was hysterical, and that's all I remember. I don't remember anything after that. I it's just blocked out of my memory. And my next conscious memory is about three months later. So clearly I survived. But whatever it was, my 8-year-old mind has, and that's the grace of God, I guess. But anyway, after that, my personality changed. From that point on, I became cold, um, removed, angry. Um, my behavior at school changed. I became very strategic and calculating, and I would organize fights at school. And I didn't get into them myself, but I kind of became like this. It was really bizarre. In the neighborhood, I was like this. I don't know. I won't go into detail because it doesn't honor the Lord, but some very dark things started happening in me. And I was the one, like 1 or 2 steps removed, organizing friends and people to do these things, breaking the law, vandalism. And it just got darker and darker and worse and worse. Much, much worse through junior high, um, to the point where, making bombs and selling them, and making like anti-personnel devices that we would bury them underneath a bridge, and someone, if they could step on them and blow their foot off. I mean, God help me, just how much darker and darker this spiraling was going. I started drinking when I was 9. Got worse. The people I was running around with just and I liked it, and I liked the power and the anger, and just and I got to the point where my dad didn't exist. I mean, we lived under the same house, but to me, he was dead. And something inside of me, I think, just died too. And I was still in church 3 times a week, and I could answer any Bible trivia question you wanted. I was excelling in school and in music and sports. I had 2 lives. But yeah, whatever that thing happened when I was 8, something shattered in me, and I became a different person too. And it just got, yeah. And then, of course, puberty and the things that go along with that got really dark for me too. And I was angry, and I didn't like that. There was a part of me I really was really hurting and angry inside, but I was fueled. You can get so much fuel by your anger and your rage. I think that meant more to me.
Mm.
And so along the way, people tried to help. My dad, God bless him, he really had a heart for guys, older guys, and he would try to help them. I think he saw himself in some of those guys, like in the church. And I think in turn, some of those, 18, 19, 20-year-old guys, they would see me and they could definitely tell there was something wrong. And so these were cool guys in college, like at OU or OSU, and they would, in the summer, would try to take me fishing or hunting, and I really liked guns, and stuff. So I would hang out with them, and they were cool, and they would try to love me and share a verse with me or get me to read my Bible. I knew they were trying, but I just wanted to be with other guys and my dad and go fishing and hunting. So I don't know that I listened so much about the spiritual things. I just wanted to escape and be around other people.
And
So
I
there
mean,
were some things like that were important.
John, did any of those guys ever just say, "Don't talk to you about spiritual things," but just say, "Hey, John, I want to get to know you. Tell me about yourself. Tell me what goes on inside your head." That it wasn't wrapped in uh, religion or church. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And that's separate from God's word
yeah,
completely. Did anybody just talk to you and listen and engage you in intentional conversations? I mean, men, other men.
Here's the crazy thing, and again, I so appreciate those guys. I've gone back later and just thanked them. They just knew what they knew. The two most meaningful things to me were two families in my neighborhood, not churched at all. Every weekend they would go to the lake. Their sons were in my class. These two families were the two morticians at the two funeral homes in town.
Go
And
figure.
so right next to both funeral homes were it's almost like a little parsonage. And so, my two friends, their families lived next door to these two funeral homes. So as a kid, we'd run around the funeral home and we'd peek in the window and watch their dads working on the bodies. And had some
Mm.
crazy stories. But anyway, I was always down running around their houses. These were childhood friends from school. And they would often take me fishing all the time. I'd go to the lake. And I had more fun with their dads, again, who were not in church. Just, they were younger than my dad, but they were around the dinner table. They were laughing. They told jokes. They seemed to be involved with their sons. They just seemed like normal dads. And I mean, they knew my family. They respected my parents. And, again, my parents were good people. Um, and they definitely knew my family's religious church, reputation. But I couldn't wait to be in their homes. And there was alcohol in their homes. There's other stuff in their homes. But there was more life there than in my own home, in those two houses.
so there were two things you said that you understood when you were seeing these families that you didn't have. Is that correct? What were those two things? I think you started with one, but then
They, well, they spent time together. They
right. Okay.
laughed together. Um, it wasn't that my family didn't have meals together, but there was interaction. Um, it was just time, and there seemed to be joy. Um, wasn't like I didn't ever see conflict, but there was an authenticity. It just felt I don't know.
And as
They seemed to have something that my family didn't have. And again, they weren't church people.
and as a little guy, that's gotta have a huge impact on you just because you're like, man, I hear about the love of God, and then I see my family right after church and what they're doing, how I'm being taken care of by my own father. That just slants your view of who God is so much as a child because it's like, wait, is God just an abuser? He's there to just,
Right.
meddle with you and destroy you, and he doesn't really care about you. All he wants is, for you to be in pain. But then you see these other families. I mean, such a huge difference in contrast, right? And looking at these families that are just so happy. So I mean, I feel for you, John, and I think it's an incredible story just to kind of start off your life that way. Um,
Well, we obviously are going to have to do part two.
Yeah.
We
also,
have barely, John, I didn't know these things about you. I mean, you and I have had a few conversations, but I didn't know any of this about you until doing this podcast with you. So we barely touched the surface. We may have to do part one, two, three, four, and five.
No,
We
you
can have
better
a
not.
longer
No,
episode.
but just to man to hear a man's true journey. Uh, we don't have time to address it, but Mark said it can distort your perspective of God. Yeah, did it distort your perspective of God?
Yes,
Okay.
it did at that time because see, none of this made sense. Everything that I was experiencing at home was contradictory to what I heard at church. And then my practical relationships with non-church friends reinforced what was going on in my head.
Hmm.
This may be the difference for us is that, okay, my father, it was very similar in my growing up. My dad was abusive and alcoholic, and I had no relationship with him. And yet my father was not, he didn't, he wasn't known as a man of God. He wasn't preaching in the church and then going home and then doing that to me. So I don't know how it happened, but I never compared God to my earthly dad. But I thought, well, thank God for that. But then your dad was up front preaching to people about the love of God. So my brain, my mind may have been tweaked as well as yours had. So, well, Mark, where do we go from here? Because there's so much more to talk with John about.
There is a lot of talk about John with John, and I think that we want to be able to hear about what your next steps were as you kind of keep on growing up, because that was your childhood. But then we know that there's teenage John, and then there's adult John, and that's a whole other story because you are where you are today. It's interesting, right? You start
Yep.
off with such a terrible beginning, and then you are now a well, you're many things, but a navigator and hugely influential with a lot of people inside of the church. So it's just there's a switchback there somewhere, and we need to hear about the switchback that happened. Um,
Mark, let me interject this. So we had a barbecue at your house, John, 2 days ago, and this is the date doesn't matter, but you sat in your patio and you were incredibly transparent about you where you are today and some of your current struggles today. So I left there, I left your home so encouraged at your transparency and authenticity. And yet some people went, well, he went through that. Now he's completely healed. He's good to go now. And life just doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And so I want to talk about that the next time we do the next episode about what you shared the other night, if you would. That will give guys who are listening to this podcast hope to go, you know what? I'm not going to have it all together. And there are going to be bumps and valleys right now, even after God has brought me through some things.
hmm,
So thank you again already for this snippet of story.
yep. Awesome to hear the beginning of this story. Um, Tune in next week to be able to hear the follow up on where John goes next and what teenage John is all about. So thank you all for joining, and we will talk again to you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Real Life Men. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who you think it would speak to also. Please subscribe and leave a review for more honest conversations about manhood, identity, and real life. This podcast is brought to you by Fahrenheit Mentoring. Please visit our website at fahrenheitmentoring.org to listen to other shows and to learn more about our course on how to be a mentor. Have comments or questions to share? Your question may appear on a future episode. Email us at contact@fahrenheitmentoring.org. Until next time, keep being authentic, keep growing, and keep following our God where He leads you.